I get graded every single day as I watch my students talk, and I get to see, was it a manageable chunk for them? Was it actually a manageable amount of language that they were able to produce to my satisfaction? That's all observable. So every single day I get that feedback, and I adjust my teaching based on the feedback that I get from the student's speech.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language,
Blaine and Von Ray discuss TPRS, teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling, and the results they've had via this method.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. We are delighted to speak with Blaine and Von Ray today, who will unlock the recipe to rapid language fluency for us. Welcome to Speaking of Language, Blaine and Von.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
I am so delighted that both of you found the time to speak with us. Before we hear the secret of the fastest way to fluency, please tell us about your own background with languages. Blaine, why don't we get started with you?
Okay, well, I grew up a language failure. I had four years of Spanish, and at age 19 went on a 2-year church mission to Chile. I couldn't produce anything. I couldn't understand anything, and I realized what a waste that 4 years that I'd spent. I'd had 1,000 hours by the time I got to that country studying this language that I couldn't produce and I couldn't understand. And I thought, what a waste that was. But I liked language, and I kept signing up for Spanish. Even though I remember in Spanish 4, I was thinking, I don't know any of this. And I just studied for the test. And that's how I got through it. And I got through it with B's, but I liked it. I just liked Spanish. And so then afterwards, I lived in Chile for 2 years and got fluent and needed something to, I tried math, and I said, I'm not a math major. And
I can relate.
Then Spanish was my second choice, and majored in Spanish and got a job teaching Spanish in 1975. And I went in the classroom realizing the only thing I know about teaching Spanish is what doesn't work. And that's how they taught me.
Yeah.
And they gave me a book, and it was miserable. And I got the first school I was at, they were going to fire me. The second school, they did fire me. In the third school, they were going to fire me. They told me, you've got to get more kids in your class. You're not going to teach here. And luckily, I found James Asher, TPR, Learning Another Language Through Actions. I ordered the book, and I read that book in August. I said, this is me. It's what I'd been looking for. And I went in and taught with commands. And I did. That was 1981.
Okay, and you know what? We'll stop you there because you're already jumping way ahead here. Hold that thought. We'll come back to that. But Von, what does your background with languages look like?
Yeah, so it's a fairly similar story to my dad's. I took 2 years. I didn't suffer through 4 years. I said, 2 years of failure was enough for me. And ironically, I also went to Chile on a mission. We don't pick where we go on a mission. We're called to a specific place. So I just happened to go to the same place as my dad. Fell in love with Spanish and with the language, and didn't know what I was going to do career-wise when I returned. And at the time, he had developed TPRS already. This was in the late 90s. And I just fell in love with teaching. I had some opportunities to start teaching people Spanish. And so I was on the phone with my dad saying, how do you do this? And because I, again, knew what didn't work. And just love teaching with stories. To me, language should be fun. I mean, there should be laughter. And this is a natural way to make learning a language very fun. very pleasurable, and to get a good result as well. So I've literally followed in my dad's footsteps.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.
Fantastic. Well, so Blaine, coming back to where you were leaving off, you mentioned TPR and Asher. You developed TPRS, or Teaching Proficiency Through Reading and Storytelling, in the late 1980s when you were a Spanish teacher. Please continue sharing with our listeners how this came about and what is TPRS.
1981, I was in a school that had 30 students in their language program. 15 in Spanish 1, 10 in Spanish 2, and 6 in Spanish 3. And that's when the principal said, you've got to get more kids in your class or you're not going to work here. And that year, I started teaching with commands. In 5 years, we had the highest percentage of enrollment in the state of Oregon for a school our size. We were actually number 6 overall out of 258 schools.
Wow.
But by teaching differently, everybody wanted to take Spanish. And they hired another full-time Spanish teacher, a full-time French teacher, part-time Japanese teacher, a part-time Russian teacher. Language at that school exploded, and it wasn't me that was doing it. It was the method. It was how I taught. And luckily, I found a book in 1984 called The Natural Approach by Stephen Krashen and Tracy Terrell. And that changed my life when I read the sentence, language is learned by learned or acquired. I don't remember the wording, by comprehensible input. When I heard that, I thought, that's what I'm missing. And so I went in and thought, well, all I got to do, I thought it meant you just talk and give input, but that wasn't it. The input part was easy. It was the comprehensible. So I went in with a lot of uncomprehensible input, and things I tried didn't work. Tracy Terrell's book didn't work, and these things didn't work for me until one day when I dramatized a story, and the kids acted out the story, and I questioned, and that the theater made the language come alive, and the questioning let me see whether comprehension was taking place. Those two elements of TPRS started from the very first story, and they continue on today.
That's amazing. So you made magic happen, basically, right? I like it.
By accident.
That's sometimes how the best magic happens. That's that's good. Von, can you tell us a little bit more how you did end up, as you said, in your dad's footsteps and what you do?
Yeah, so I graduated from college, and then I got a job. The school I worked at was in the Bay Area in California. They were looking for a TPRS teacher. Again, at this time, TPRS was pretty well known. My dad had been presenting for decades at this point. So some schools just wanted TPRS teachers.
Sure.
So that was my entry point, was teaching with TPRS. And I mean, everybody, any TPRS teacher has to go on a journey and learn how to do this. Just like my dad was saying, how do you make the language comprehensible, right? And there's so much observation. We teach a sentence or part of the story, and you see if it sticks, right? Does it actually stick? Can they actually use it in their speech? And there's that's a process of trial and error. There's some observation. You learn certain words are harder and easier. And from the student perspective as well, as I've learned languages, some phrases and words and languages are just a lot harder, and they take a lot more repetition. So I taught for 6 years in the classroom, and then joined my dad's company, TPRS Books, and I've been with it ever since. A few years ago, we switched roles. He sold me the companies, and we just seamlessly kept going. And I love this work. Love impacting teachers' lives and students' lives. With language.
Yep, and it's important work. So thanks for that.
So now my biggest fear is that he'll fire me, and so far he hasn't. So I just keep hoping every day. So I've really got to do a good job, or he'll boot me. He can boot me any day.
A shameless power grab. Yes.
You need more magic.
Yeah.
Well, so over the last 15 years or so, there's been a lot of research on the effectiveness of TPRS. Karen Lichtman, who was on our podcast back in 2021, reviewed existing TPRS research and found that, I'm quoting now, the majority of the research has found that TPRS students outperform traditional students on some measures of language skills. End quote. All 30 comparative studies that she looked at supported the use of TPRS. 21 of the 30 studies showed advantages for TPRS over other teaching methods. So, how is TPRS different and why does it work?
One thing that if we, and Vaughn can talk about this too, if we were just talking about fluency, there's nothing better. And we are doing things that nobody would have ever imagined possible. We've perfected this, and this 2.0 that Angelica talked about, this is miraculous for us. Even today, we started in September an English and a Spanish class, and to see their progress in 30 to 40 hours of class is shocking. What the fluency that, and we've just discovered some things. But anyway, go ahead, Vaughn. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I mean that really is our filter and our perspective and the expertise is how do you get students fluent, which is which ACTFL study and these what our students have taken is the STAMP test, which is just one of the proficiency tests. The data shows it takes 4 to 7 years for beginning students to reach the intermediate low or intermediate mid. So I mean, this is a multi-year process. 85% of our students are reaching, beginning students, they're reaching these same levels of fluency in 60 to 80 hours. So it's just really faster. And how they do it, we feel like we've perfected the science in that we use the term a manageable chunk. A chunk is an amount of language we give our students, and we want to know if they can produce it. I love the metaphor of an apple. If we as language teachers, the apple represents the amount of language we're giving our students in a given day. So we hand our students this apple, and then we say, take a bite out of the apple. Okay, there's some language we're teaching them. Now, a manageable chunk with the metaphor of an apple, right? If I take a bite of an apple, I take I don't know how big of a bite you guys take. Okay, I take a bite. And if I don't choke on it, that's a manageable amount of apple. But if I take too big of a bite out of an apple, I'm going to choke on that apple. In the same token, if we give our students too much language, they can't produce it. And that's the biggest challenge, is limiting that amount of language so that they can actually produce it. And we feel we've perfected, at least in theory, that science of, okay, the manageable chunk is what we're after. So we give them enough language that we then observe they can produce. If they can't produce it, we have to reduce the amount of language we're teaching. And then in a process of 60 to 80 hours of doing this, giving them limited doses of language, gradually getting a little harder, they are reaching this intermediate level.
Heard the quote, if they can't say it, they don't know it. And that's TPRS 2.0 is based 100% on that concept. They have to be able to produce this chunk, which is basically a paragraph of language in the context of I, you, he, she. So they're dramatizing a story and they're producing this chunk talking about I, you, and he. And they're doing the verb changes in saying that chunk. But if our slowest processing student in the class can't produce this chunk, we're doing something wrong.
So can you walk our listeners through what actually happens in a TPRS classroom? So the reading and the storytelling, do the students do the reading? Does the teacher do the reading? Who is doing the storytelling? What is the connection between that comprehensible input and between the fluency that students attain?
Well, the reading is kind of a byproduct. We read this story at the beginning of every class kind of more as a refresher to just remind us of the facts of the story, of what's going on. But what's really happening is we start with a sentence with the idea of working up to a paragraph. So a sentence would be, we might add the sentence, there's a boy, the boy is George. And then we have everyone in our class be George. So every student, I would call Angelica George by your name and George to remind you that you're not Angelica in this story. You are George. And so I'm going to say, there is a boy. The boy is George. You are George.
I am George.
And then I add myself. And so we always take on the character of Petey the pizza. And so in this story, I am not a boy. I am a pizza. I am Petey. You are George. I am Petey. I'm a pizza. You're a boy. To see now, we're at a chunk. So we start with, first of all, what we call circling, where they just process and they don't produce. They produce only with yes or no or oh or something, no production. But then that's just for processing. Once they're processing that sentence, then we go to individuals and we see, can you answer a sentence? So I say, Angelica, then they're required to answer in a complete sentence. So I say, Angelica George, are you a boy?
Yes, I am a boy.
And then I verify it and I say, yes, you are a boy. And then I might add something. You're a boy and I'm a pizza. You're George and I'm Petey. And then I might say to you, Angelica George, who is George?
I am George.
Yes, you are George. Then I'll say, Angelica George, who is Petey?
You are Petey. You are
Yes.
the pizza.
Yes, I'm Petey. I'm Petey the pizza. You're George, and you're George the boy. Do you see? And so then we're at the paragraph level. And this is what Vaughn was talking about when he said the chunk. So we're always talking in your own words.
Yep.
There's nothing rote. There's nothing memorized. It's nothing. You're just telling this chunk in your own words. And so that everybody in class, we want everybody to give their interpretation. In other words, their time on the stage. And so then we'd say, there's a boy, he's George, he's not a pizza, he's a boy. I am a pizza, I'm Petey. Then I'd say, Angelica George, describe the situation.
You are Petey. You are the pizza. I want pizza.
You don't know want.
Oh,
You only
sorry.
know. Then I'll verify that back to you and I say, yes, you are a boy. You are George. I'm not a boy. I'm not George. I'm Petey. I'm Petey the pizza. And you are George. You are a boy. Every time this is said, it's said differently. And then I say it back and you say it back. And kids hear this over and over. And that's what it takes to get language strong enough to produce it.
Right.
I'll share a little nuance too, because a lot of the things we do, like for example, where Blaine says, "Oh, you're all a character in the story," and we call on our students. We literally do that in the story. Angelica George, Sam George. So the reason we do that is because of past failure with TPRS 1.0. Our students weren't fluent in. First of all, they weren't very fluent at all. We basically TPRS 1.0. The tagline would be, CI was stories. Our focus was not on production. It was, talk about this manageable chunk, right? So I would give my students instead of saying, take a bite of the apple, right, and choke on it, I'd give them a watermelon, right? Here's a watermelon. There's so much language.
Yeah.
Since our focus was not on fluency, it was on comprehension. We just bombarded them with all this language because we didn't have that focus or understanding of how to get students fluent.
Our best students were fluent, but they were fluent in third person because that's how we develop stories. But what TPRS 2.0 did was it developed fluency on a much smaller chunk. So now, before, in a year, we'd go through a story a week, 30 to 40 stories in a year.
Oh, wow.
Now, we do a story in 30 hours. So we're doing much, much slower, 10 times slower, but we're getting fluency in this smaller amount of language in I, you, he, she. It's a tremendous difference.
Yeah.
Great. So you already mentioned that TPRS is fun and engaging for students. What are some other benefits of this method?
And to learn in a pleasurable environment and get a result, right? Like when I think of classes I've been to where my energy goes up, right? I mean, that to me, that's a very positive experience. If I leave a class engaged and my energy level's higher, that's how TPRS classes are for me. I've been teaching this week. I taught yesterday. Oh my goodness, the energy level was higher. Because good storytelling, there's drama, there's humor, there's unexpected twists and turns. There's co-creation. Our students, they contribute a lot of the details. So this is play, right? I get to go play and help people become fluent in a language that I'm solving a real problem for them, right? I mean, to become intermediate fluent is a great accomplishment. So I would say just, hey, that energy level, there's fun, there's enjoyment. What a great thing for a learning environment.
That nothing motivates like success.
Right.
And I teach an intermediate and an advanced class. It doesn't matter their level. This feeling of what they can do with this chunk, and we challenge them by characters. And like we'll say, Angelica George, now you're Petey. You be Petey, and I'm George. And then their brain has to do all of the switches.
Yeah, my mind's blown. I am
to do
Petey.
that. You are a pizza.
I am pizza.
I'm George. You're the pizza. And so we role play. We change the roles. And this, and in Spanish, the object and indirect object pronouns go before the verb. And so that's a learning process of feel.
We've been teaching these, we teach virtual classes. We've done it for several years now. So our sample size is big enough. And our very best students, they've reached intermediate high in the same class, about maybe 10 to 15%. So the very top. And again, ACTFL says that's 9 years.
But that's 9 years of the best students in ACTFL. Because who takes Spanish 9? Only your very top students. I mean, It's not even 1 out of 20 would make it to Spanish 9. And they're saying they're getting to intermediate high. Vaughn was at a workshop last week, and boy, when he says these numbers on this stamp test, the one teacher,
Yeah, I was presenting at the Southwest Colt Conference on our book, The Fast Way to Fluency, and I just said, hey, how many of you would like these results? Yeah, 85% getting intermediate and 60 to 80. I mean, every hand goes up, of course.
Sure.
And then I ask, are any of you getting good results right now? Or are any of your students getting intermediate in a school year? And a woman raised her hand, and I'm curious, right? I want to see what people are already doing. And so I just asked her, I said, what percentage of your students are getting intermediate in a school year? And she said, she said 5%, and It's probably what we got with TPRS 1.0, a very low percentage. And yeah, we're there to help her with ideas to increase that dramatically. I mean, 85% is a solid, that's a solid number.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I can totally see the allure and the effectiveness in public education or in K-12 education for younger learners. How does the TPRS 2.0 recipe for success translate into adult language learning? Is it the same approach that you would follow?
It's funny that that's just about all we've done. All of our experimentation and everything has been with adult learners. And it's interesting that we start for the very first time, we reverse this, and in September started an English class that we'd never done before. They couldn't produce a sentence of English on day one. And so we didn't know how this would go. In fact, we guarantee intermediate fluency in our Spanish classes, but there was no way we'd do this in English because we hadn't tried it. Much to our surprise, they're better at English than the Spanish, and it's just because this way of teaching, the verbs are easy in English, and it's just a much easier process to learn fluency in learning English than it is learning Spanish, because of verb conjugations that slow the process down many times, where the English verbs, few of them have conjugations.
Right.
It's interesting to also throughout the process, right? Day one is the smallest chunk, right? What Blaine was sharing with you, Angelica. Yeah, there's a boy. The boy's George. I'm Petey. I'm the Petey. It's not a lot of information.
Sure.
Well, as the hours progress, the stories get quite a bit longer. So our students in that first 10 to 20 hours, we see there's more challenge there. And that's also demonstrated in shorter when they describe the situation, they're talking, they speak for a smaller, shorter amount of time. Whereas now these classes right now, they're in the 30 to 40 hour mark. Almost everybody can speak for several minutes. I mean, multiple minutes. So
often have to limit their time because we have pretty big classes and we want everybody to have the chance. Sometimes at first I give them all the time they want. And then at the end I say, okay, everybody's got 2 minutes max, or you've got 1 minute. And I just have to cut them off just so that everybody can talk.
Von, as we discussed earlier, you are the current owner of TPRS Books. So in addition to the recent TPRS 2.0, The Fastest Way to Fluency book, tell us about what other resources you provide.
Yeah, wonderful. Our company really does three things. We train teachers how to teach, so we give regular TPRS trainings, virtual in-person school districts, right? The variety of those. We've already mentioned our language classes. And we also publish a whole bunch of books. We've published over 100 readers, small readers, a whole bunch of them. Here's one of several, a bunch of Spanish, various languages, right? So we're known for that, for these readers that we produce. And then pedagogical books as well, right, and curriculum. So those are really the three things we do to serve people. Books, training, language classes.
Fantastic. And you mentioned that you attend conferences, of course, but where can our listeners learn more about TPRS?
Perfect. Our website, tprsbooks.com. All of everything's there, right? Resources, language classes, and yeah.
Wonderful.
Check out our website. Yeah.
Trainings, we have live trainings, we have online trainings. They can just go and find out about, and the real best way is to take a class.
The beauty of the describe the situation, as Blaine was saying, is right. Go back to the apple, right? I get graded every single day as I watch my students talk, and I get to see, was it a manageable chunk for them? Was it actually a manageable amount of language that they were able to produce to my satisfaction with confidence, accuracy, and no hesitation, which is the goal. That's all observable. So every single day I get that feedback, and I adjust my teaching based on the feedback that I get from the student's speech.
Well, gentlemen, this was wonderful. I am George, and I am pizza.
No, I'm the pizza.
Oh, I'll fight you on that, Blaine. Maybe we can both be pizza.
No, okay, I'll let you be a pizza for a little bit.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's very gracious of you.
This is Angelica at her best right there. Her charming.
Delightful pizza.
There we go. There we go. Before we sign off, though, we'd like to ask each of you for a word in a language that you love, that you are learning, that you want to learn, that makes you feel good. What is that word for each of you?
So mine is such a simple phrase. Having it's es obvio, which means it's obvious, but the feeling behind this phrase, having taught with stories for years and in the TPRS world, we use this phrase es obvio. We'll say something ironic, right? Something that's not obvious at all. It could be anything.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, and then we just act like it's obvious and normal. So there's just a lot of humor and really positive emotion in this simple phrase. It's obvious. Es obvio.
I like it. Awesome. Blaine, what about you?
Oh, the word I thought of was, I love this word in Spanish. It's cariño. And we don't have the word in English. It's non-romantic love. Mm-hmm. So I always thought, I love my students. I love teaching. Really, I love my students. And that was always expressed in the word cariño.
Nice.
I have a good friend, a teacher, and he said, you can't teach cariño. You know?
Beautiful. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for speaking of language with us, Blaine and Von.
Thank you for inviting us. We
us.
love this. Thank
you so much.
This was really great for us.
Tune in next week to hear from our most recent LRC Speaker Series presenter, Dr. Glaucia Silva. She is giving a talk this afternoon about linguistic production and perception in heritage language.
You can catch her talk live today, March 12th at 5 p.m. Eastern, or watch the recording later on our website. And don't forget to listen to next week's episode. Until then.
Auf Wiederhören.
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu.
And follow Cornell LRC on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelica Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.
I am pizza!